The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, hi. My name's David Silverman. I write a blog called Hollywood Therapy here on Psych Central. It's kind of helpful for screenwriters or writers of all kinds, or anybody in the creative field at all, I guess. But today I'm going to start off on creative blocks and just talk briefly about them. Okay, and here's number one, when you're blocked on the idea for a movie. So blocks happen in all kinds of different ways. Usually people experience them when they're like halfway through the screenplay and they get stuck on something and they just can't figure out where to go, where the next, in most cases I suggest coming back to your outline, trying to, figure out where you left off. But people do veer off the outline, and that's fine. A lot of the best screenwriters do that. But then you enter a territory where you're not sure where the next move is, and you have to kind of figure it out. So there's those kinds of creative blocks, and then there's the kind of creative block where you're starting and you just don't have a good idea. So, which is what I'm going to talk about first. So, where do people come up with movie ideas? So there's a bunch of different ways. One of them is what's considered the mashup. A mashup is like when you combine two movies, sort of, so to speak, or a genre, or a setting, or a time frame to another movie. So, perfect example of that is the movie Outlander with Sean Connery. That movie is basically High Noon with Gary Cooper. Sean Connery plays the Gary Cooper part. It's all about him standing up to the bad guys. It takes place on one of Jupiter's moons, which is different. But both movies very successful. Another example is Alien by Ridley Scott. He went around pitching that as Jaws in outer space. And you can kind of get the idea. Instead of a shark, it's those little creatures that burst out of people's chests. But that's how we sold the movie, Jaws in outer space. The Coen brothers, they took a very, somewhat obscure source materials, Homer's Odyssey, and that described the trip, in sort of mythological terms, where they're coming up against cyclopses and sirens and weird things like that. And they used that as the basis for Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And they just changed up the setting and the time frame. So that took place in the 30s. There's other classic examples. For example, James Cameron came up with Titanic, and he kind of merged two elements together. One was the disaster film, and the other was a romance of opposites. Rose and Jack, one was kind of a rich debutante, and Jack was a poor Irish guy. Anyway, those things came together nicely. Dances with Wolves is another example with Kevin Costner. He was a perfect fish out of water story where he's a Caucasian soldier and he's raised by the Lakota Sioux, and he grows up in that culture, and he eventually defends them against other Caucasians coming after him, American soldiers. The second element was making it a Western. So, and Cameron did something similar with Avatar, which is basically the same storyline except in outer space. And you could go on and on. Another great example that I like a lot is Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. Now, there was a movie called Failsafe that came out around the same time. It was about a guy who gets orders to drop a nuclear weapon on Russia, and it's all about trying to stop him from doing that. And Strangelove is a similar storyline, except they made it into a dark comedy. So again, you had just a lot of examples of how that works. So that's another way of people finding ideas for movies. Some people adapt novels and plays. This can be tricky because novels and plays, they're not written visually, they're not written in 3 acts, they're not necessarily have characters who change through conflict. So there tends to be a lot of adapting for those kinds of situations. A great example of that is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Basically started out as a novel by Ken Kesey. It was about a guy, eventually it was played by Jack Nicholson, who was kind of a con man. He was on the run from the law, right? And he checked himself into a loony bin, basically. And then the story is a great story about how he helps the inmates to rebel against Nurse Ratched. And of course, it has a very sort of shocking ending. But again, Kirk Douglas owned the rights to the novel. A guy named Dale Wasserman wrote a play based on it, and Kirk Douglas played the Randall McMurphy part, which would eventually be played by Nicholson. So, you know, he was trying to set it up as a movie for a long time, and he wanted to play the Nicholson character, but he kept getting older and older. And then he let his son, Michael Douglas, have the rights. He just, you know, signed it over. And that's when things started to click. They got Nicholson in there. They got Milos Forman in to direct. And it won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Actor, and Best Actress. I think that's called a sweep, you know. So anyway, other ways are newspaper articles, and these are much cheaper. You have to have a lot of money to buy a novel like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but newspaper articles not so much. Some examples. Argo, the movie Argo, was based on a Wired magazine article called How the CIA Used a Fake Sci-Fi Flick to Rescue Americans from Tehran. The Fast and the Furious, believe it or not, was based on a Vibe magazine article called Racer X. The Bling Ring was based on a Vanity Fair article called The Suspects Wore Louboutins. So there's tons of examples. One of the best examples is the Dallas Buyers Club, which was a story about a homophobic cowboy with AIDS who's learned to smuggle HIV drugs from Mexico, where they're legal, to Dallas, where they weren't legal. And very clever. He didn't sell the HIV drugs once he's in Texas. He created a club, the Dallas Buyers Club, where people joined and then they had access to the drugs. So he got around it. It was clever. It was a great idea for a movie because this guy was a rodeo clown. He was homophobic. He was a racist. And he kind of changes as he starts dealing with the gay people who need the HIV drugs, and he comes to embrace them. So had a great dramatic structure. Another good way to find ideas if you're stuck is the public domain. So what does public domain mean? It means, let's say you have Romeo and Juliet, right? Shakespeare play, And as long as it's 70 years after the author dies, that's the way the copyright law reads in the United States anyway. You have to wait 70 years after the author dies. So Shakespeare's been dead for a long time. So West Side Story was basically Romeo and Juliet. So in the same way, Lion King was Hamlet. Cruel Intentions was Liaisons Dangerous. Not sure how to pronounce that, but again, it's there have been all sorts of Shakespeare plays that were converted into high school settings as well. So all those things are good ways to come up with movie ideas. And the other ways, look at what your friends are doing. Maybe something one of them is doing will suggest a really good idea for a movie. Sometimes something interesting that happened in your life would make a good idea. And another thing people do sometimes is they look at a movie. I think my example here was Gravity. So what happens to the Sandra Bullock character once she makes it to the ground safely? And those kind of movies, there's been movies about astronauts who get back to Earth and then strange things start happening to them or whatever. So sometimes you come up with a movie idea based on what happens after, what happens before, what happens, what was the story of Sandra Bullock before Gravity. So a lot of people come up with movie ideas based on that. All right, so another form of creative blocks happens when you're in the middle of the script. I talked about that a little bit. Some of the methods that I've been using, I will, wait, get up early the next morning after I'm stuck, and I'll reread the entire script. Usually I get this sort of momentum building in my head. Ideas are coming to me. And when I get to the part where I was stuck, a lot of ideas start coming to me. So that's one method that I recommend, is just kind of getting into the flow of the stuff you've already written, the good stuff, and just read it and see what your mind comes up with. Typical ideas are to clear your head, take a walk, take a nap, do something to get away from it. The idea being sometimes you're stuck on it because there was a problem, and sometimes problems get solved in your dreams also. So the idea of waiting a day and taking it up again works for some people. Sometimes the problem might have to do with your with your story or with your characters. So there's a lot of other things you can do with scenes, for example. Sometimes if you're writing a funny scene, you might want to some people just write a straight dramatic scene, but with jokes. So if it's hard to get through that kind of a scene, go back and look at what's a funnier idea for the scene. So in other words, there's a beginning, middle, and end that builds to a punchline. Usually that will give you a better comedy scene. The other thing is to think of some twists, some new dialogue, up the conflict, up the stakes, those kinds of things. Those can give you new ideas about where to go when you're stuck in the middle. The other possibility is you might have to abandon some of your material, unfortunately, in which case we read the script up to where you get stuck, and then just let your imagination take over. Imagination. You might come up with some ideas. Sometimes you don't have to abandon the whole script. Sometimes it's just the last 20 pages, whatever doesn't work. Sometimes a new character can help. A fresh direction can help. But what I use most when I'm stuck in the middle is I go back and look at the character's internal needs. So in a screenplay, you're generally going to want to have a character who pushes the action. So you want to know what his internal motivations are and what his external motivations are. So usually if you look, and also what the theme of your movie is. So if you're stuck at certain places, go back and look what your character's like. Again, in movies, the character changes through conflict. So you keep in mind where your character starts and where it ends. And so if you're stuck in the middle, sometimes that will give you direction. You know, okay, I have to get the character from A to B. What's a good move here in the middle? That kind of thing. All right, so those are blocks. The next topic has to do with the best way to think about your career. So a lot of people start out and they just write, one screenplay, and they put all their eggs in that basket, and that's a prescription for disaster. Usually, there's a lot of reasons why, but the first script usually doesn't get made or sold, and then it's easy to give up. So it's better, and this is a mindset that I'm pitching that's good psychologically, is to think of your career as a long career that's going to last. You're going to be writing lots of scripts. When you make that commitment, also, you don't have to wonder what you should be doing in your spare time. You have to write. And it puts writing in its rightful place as your highest priority. Okay, continuing the same idea. I talked about what happens to rookie screenwriters when they write the one script. A lot of times they think, this is going to make me rich and famous. It's just, the truth is that almost never happens. A script can be a great sample, though, which can get you a meeting with an agent or a producer. So it's better to take the long view and realize that those are positive outcomes. Getting a meeting, meeting a producer, the selling a script is not the only positive outcome. When you take the long view, also, you're basically saying to yourself, I'm going to write dozens of scripts, and not every one of them is going to sell. So you don't get hung up on not selling your first screenplay. All right, number 5. Slide number 5, Woody Allen said, 80% of success is showing up. So basically, you show up at the typewriter every day, you pick a time that works, and you try to write 2 pages a day. So actually showing up prompts your mind to kind of go into automatic pilot, organizing your ideas and clearing your head and setting out writing. Key is also picking manageable goals. Like, for example, 3 pages a day is not a huge goal. You can probably accomplish that. And then reward yourself. Whatever you like to do, if it's frozen yogurt or scotch or whatever. Okay. Slide number 6 has to do with unfinished business in your life. So the basic idea of this one is that we all have a list of things we're supposed to do. And what your mind does when all those things are floating around in your head is it makes it harder to move ahead and write your screenplay, for example. because your mind will go to, oh, I'm supposed to get the car fixed, oh, I'm supposed to go shopping, I'm supposed to get the milk, whatever. So a good way of doing that is to take care of those errands and the simple ones. So your mind, if you have a to-do list, try to knock off a bunch of those things before you start writing. Okay. The next one has to do with psyching yourself up for that. And this is something I do. I happen to like the Rolling Stones, and I have some records, some concert records. I have all their records, but a lot of times I'll listen to a song like Tumbling Dice, and I will get myself a cup of hot tea, and a couple things happen when you do that. I'm sitting down at the computer. So again, I'm showing up for work in the morning, or even sometimes in the afternoon. My brain isn't working very well. So if I can jack up my adrenaline by drinking tea and listening to loud music, it generally gets me going. I like noise. Some people don't. But when I'm creating, I like a lot of noise going on. It makes me feel like I'm not missing out on too much for some reason. The caffeine will help. And once you get going, you're gonna be able to create a bunch of inertia that will carry you forward. So again, whatever it is for you, it might be something different. It might not be caffeine. It might be a beer. It might be a glass of wine. So whatever works. Okay, slide number 8. How to figure out how to get into flow. Now, flow, most writers know what flow is. It's kind of this state where things just seem to come easily, and they don't stop. So that's the best time to be writing. For me, it happens late at night, because, and it only happens late at night when I know I don't have to get up in the morning. So if I can sleep till noon, I can work all night. Again, sometimes coffee or wine or Coke or beer might help. Part of it is being able to clear your mind and center, and being able to de-stress yourself. So the next slide is how do writers center themselves? So there's a bunch of relaxation techniques. These are all kind of psychological. Yoga breathing is one. Just, if you're sitting there and you're having a hard time getting into writing, take some controlled breaths. Meditation is something some people like to do. Some people can't stand the thought, but it's a way to clear your mind. Mindfulness is kind of a lifestyle choice where people are trying to stay in the moment and not trying to live in the future or the past. Progressive relaxation is kind of a way of stretching the muscles in your body from head to toe, and that creates a relaxing, your muscles can relax after you stretch them. So, and number 5, the relaxing environment has to do with relaxing music, lighting, whatever works for you. Okay, some more about centering on slide 10. Use manageable writing goals, and again, don't be overwhelmed by writing, wanting to write 30 pages. Don't get stuck. Allow yourself to ignore some of the problems. This kind of goes along with what people call a vomit draft. Don't sweat the small stuff. You want to be able to keep the flow and not to be too self-critical during the flow. You want to be able to turn off that critical voice that stops you. So this is kind of the first draft. This page has to do with kind of the first draft process. So criticism will come later when you're doing rewrites. Okay, slide number 11 is visualizing success. These are psychological principles that seem to work pretty well for people. People do vision boards and things like that. In any case, visualize yourself as a success. Maybe you're on a set talking to an actor. Maybe you're living in your mansion. You're rubbing shoulders with the elite. All kinds of stuff like that. Stuff like that works. Number 12, the idea of becoming a screenwriter is a big dream. It's huge. Very few people get to make that. So sometimes after spending years and years thinking about the Oscars, it's easy to kind of lose faith. And so sometimes I tell people to dream small. And what I mean by that is to work towards manageable goals. Whatever smaller goals you have, you could be making a short film, getting it into a festival. It could be selling a TV script, or it could even be just getting a pitch session or an agent. Again, selling a screenplay is so tough. You need to focus on the smaller positive outcomes. There's more on this on slide 13. So, what are positive outcomes that you can celebrate? A networking experience, placing in a screenwriting contest, make a phone call every day to someone you want to network with, and like the better you get at that, the more you'll feel like doing it. Part of the reason that this kind of thing works is when you have success with smaller goals, it snowballs. And like a lot of small successes can build your confidence up so you can go after a larger success. The next slide. Some people, everybody has a different place where they like to write, but this can be important psychologically. Most writers like a quiet place, but others like Starbucks or a bar or what have you. It makes you feel like you're not chained to a desk. For similar reasons, people will rent a cabin or a hotel at the beach and stay there for several weeks just so they can work with no distractions. Sometimes if you can't afford to do that, you can maybe make your office space feel like a cabin or a beach house. So you can put up posters of the beach and stuff like that. Some people would prefer to work in the kitchen where they're close to food. Some people like to eat while they're writing. The coffee's in the kitchen, things like that, the beer's in the kitchen. Some people like to write outside. Again, you don't want to feel like you're chained to your desk. So, changing things up can help. Some people go to bohemian locations like New York or Paris or downtown LA. Whatever works. The next slide has to do with the people you surround yourself with. Okay, so there's a lot of good things about hanging out with successful writers. They're interested in the same things you are. You can talk about movies like a geek. You can go into favorite scenes, things like that. Successful people tend to spur us on, and we can always learn from them. They can tell us which producers are accepting scripts and what genres are selling. And we can ask advice if we get to know them well enough. And you might even get a mentor out of it. The next slide has to do with random productivity tips. Okay. So these are things that screenwriters try, and sometimes they work. And if they work, great. And if they don't work, try something different. So list the 3 most important things you need to do the next day, and then do them. Cross them off the list. Decide on 3 times a day to check your calls, emails, and your social media stuff, so you don't check them all day long. And if you need a break, take a shower or wash your face. Use warm or hot water. It tends to give you like a quick, it's refreshing, and it gives you like a boost. Some more random ideas that can help. So make decisions about your everyday tasks before the week starts. So if you know what you're going to wear, if you're going to where you're going to park, where you're going to lunch all week, you won't be sitting around trying to make decisions about what you're going to do next. Some people listen to podcasts that boost motivation. So Tony Robbins, you might want to listen to John August. Screenwriters have podcasts too. Exercise is good for creative endeavors. People who exercise seem to be able to focus for longer periods of time. Another thing is you have to kind of, writers can be people pleasers at times, but you have to learn to say no, so you don't get people asking you to do this and this, or run errands for them, help them with their homework or what have you. So if you're going to be a writer, you have to limit the time that you spend doing stuff for other people. And part of saying no means being aware that they might just ask you again and again. So you have to get used to that too. All right, so slide 18 has some more random productivity tips for screenwriters. Have an accountability friend is good. Someone who can, bug you, ask you how many pages you wrote today, ask why you didn't write them, what have you. And then you guys can have a relationship where you're both hold each other accountable for things. So you return the favor. Okay. What's good for your brain? Fish, nuts, seeds, and dark chocolate. If you're going to have snacks while you're writing, those are good ones. Bad snacks are donuts, candy bars, and other sweets. Those things not only kind of bad for you, but they can create the sugar high and then a crash, and that can derail you. Green tea is probably a good thing to drink if you want to get the caffeine. It's better than coffee. And if you're up against a deadline, you might want to go to Red Bull, Monster, 5-hour energy drink, whatever. You're going to crash after that. So those are best for deadlines. And the temperature you work at, believe it or not, can be a factor. The ideal temperature is 70 to 72. And research shows that once you get to 86 degrees, you become 10% less effective. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some writer's rituals. So what are rituals? Like for me, I was talking about, I like to come into my office, which is uncluttered, it's clean, I have some pictures on the wall that I like, the lighting is not too bright, I have dimmers everywhere, I have music, and I have a TV. Sometimes I like to write with the television on too. It just depends on my mood. I guess it makes me feel less alone, like I'm in a bar or something. Anyway, there's a bunch of famous creative people who have their own rituals. I did some research on it. Twyla Tharp has written a book called The Creative Habit, and she has a ritual where she gets up at 5:30 a.m. She gets dressed in her gym clothes. She goes downstairs in New York, and she hails a cab to the gym. So the way she puts it, she says, the ritual is not the workout, it's the cab. In other words, you go downstairs, you hail the cab, and as soon as you get in the cab, your ritual is completed, and the rest of your day is going to be on automatic pilot. So let's talk about some writers. Stephen King, his ritual during the first 4 novels was drinking a 12-pack of beer every night and doing lines of cocaine. So believe it or not, he wrote Cujo, Carrie, Christine, and Salem's Lot that way. Afterwards, his family had an intervention, and he changed his ritual. It was more about, getting up early. He used to get up at 8. After that, he took vitamins. He played his favorite music. He sat in the same seat, and he liked kind of a cluttered look with papers everywhere on his desk. Again, something different for everybody. Joan Didion wrote A Star is Born, Panic in Needle Park, Up Close and Personal. She's a screenwriter as well as a novelist. So she has a different kind of ritual where she writes in the morning, but in the afternoon is kind of when her ritual starts. So she reviews all the work she did that day. She makes notes. She takes a break for dinner and has drinks. Then the next day, she knows exactly where she wants to start because she's done notes, and she has a pretty good idea of the changes she wants to make in yesterday's work and where she wants to go moving forward. So Jack Kerouac, another writer, he did write some screenplays. He also wrote On the Road and Big Sur. Those both were made into movies, but they were novels. So he was known as kind of like a Beat Generation guy, and he was into drugs, especially amphetamines. She said that he wrote his biggest novel, On the Road, in I think a week. It's also, there's a rumor that he wrote it on a single scroll of paper. So he had some weird rituals. Another one was he would start writing at midnight, and he would light a candle, and then he would work all night. Usually he'd be fueled with some sort of drugs, and then in the morning he would blow out the candle, and that was the end of his ritual. He also had some kind of exercises that he liked to do. He liked to do headstands. He would let his feet down 9 times, counting each time. And he also had a prayer where he said, he prayed to Jesus to preserve his sanity and his energy so he could help my family. And his family was basically a cat and a wife and his paralyzed mother. So some of these writers did bring physical stuff into it. If it wasn't, like for him, headstands, various forms of exercise. Kurt Vonnegut, similarly, had exercise as part of his daily rituals, his writing rituals. He would get up at 5:30 a.m. He would write and walk until 8:30. Then he would take breakfast and continue writing till 10 a.m. And the rest of his day was a very strict routine at all. He had, after 10, he walked into town, he did errands, he swam for half an hour, he did push-ups and sit-ups, returned home at 11:45. And the rest of his day he read and he taught literature, so he prepared his lessons, and then he went to sleep. He always listened to jazz and had a drink of scotch. And he was asleep by 10. So some writers, just their whole day was very structured. And one last writer, Maya Angelou, used to get up at 6:30 in the morning, and she had a hotel room that she rented all year round. And she would go there in the morning at 6:30, and she would always bring a Bible and a thesaurus and crossword puzzles. So at the hotel, she didn't have any distractions. She would take breaks to do crosswords, which she felt helped her in a lot of different ways. It's hard to just write straight through for 3 or 4 hours. She knocked off at 2 p.m. And she had a weird kind of a ritual also, where she never, like, when she finished a page, she would either keep it or sometimes she would crumple it up and throw it on the floor. So she asked all of her maids not to ever clean up the floor, because sometimes she would come back to the room and look for the pages that were crumpled up because she needed to use something. Anyway, so this gives you an idea of what certain writers have done. I have my own ritual. You probably have yours, but just to reinforce how they work, they keep you from overthinking. You don't have a lot of time to ask questions while you're doing your ritual. You're less likely to say that I don't feel like it, or this isn't a good day, or what have you. The last slide, I just noticed some similarities. A lot of writers get up early, which I don't like. Some of them run all night, which I prefer. Most of these people had exercise involved: swimming, headstands, push-ups, and taking walks. And almost all of them integrated drinking, like wine or scotch, into the routine. Either it was a break or a treat. And then King and Kerouac took some heavy drugs, which I don't recommend. They're expensive and they can lead to problems. All right, so that's that. I guess I'm done with the presentation part of the webinar, and we'll open up the questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. The first question that popped up, and you did kind of answer it with the disclaimer of don't do drugs, is, do you really think that doing drugs make you a better writer, or is this just sort of a Hollywood or romanticized idea that just because a couple of people did the drugs that it sort of is blown out of proportion, this whole mind expansion thing? The exact question is do you believe that doing drugs makes somebody a better writer, or is it just a coincidence?
I don't believe it makes anyone a better writer, but I understand the way King and Kerouac were using those to keep them working for 8 hours straight, in other words. So to the extent that it can help you work, well, then caffeine can do that, Monster energy drinks can do that, all kinds of other ways that are less dangerous.
Certainly. Thank you so much. And the questions are coming in. We're going to give the audience a moment to type in some more. They're hovering over their keyboards, typing even as we speak. Do you have anything to add at the moment right now while we're giving them an opportunity to ask a couple of questions?
Well, since we're on that subject of the drugs, there was another writer, Philip K. Dick. He wrote Minority Report, and Blade Runner, and a lot of other great stuff. Practically everything he wrote, he was using methamphetamine. So, I mean, there's a lot of great writers like Ray Bradbury and all these other great people that never went there. But he's a special case. He also went pretty much insane. So, and there's another warning.
So the warning is that being a great writer might mean that you will go insane?
Well, you know, I wrote a blog on how writers can be more susceptible to mental illness. You know, there's a lot of writers, you know, you have Sylvia Plath and people like that, committed suicide. J.K. Rowling was depressed. It's a solitary business. It's a very kind of internal world. You know, it's filled with disappointment, rejections, and things like that. So, yeah, I would advise writers to take care of themselves, and you know, if necessary, see a therapist. You know, don't get so focused on being a writer that you forget to take care of yourself, your mental health.
Excellent. The next question is, where can we find your blog online?
Okay, well, it's at Psych Central. If you Google Hollywood Therapy Psych Central, you'll probably go right there. Yeah, I think that's the best way to find it.
There you go, Hollywood Therapy on Psych Central. How long have you been writing that blog?
About 3 years. I think there's you know, it's getting up there. It's more than 150 blogs, and they're all, for the most part, 95% of them are helpful ideas on how to write. Just even career advice, things like that, what the best day jobs are for writers. You know, how to, I was a reader for the studios as well, so I talk about what readers look for when they read scripts as well.
Gotcha. The next question that has popped up is, you say that writing is a solitary business. Do you have any advice for highly extroverted people that also want to be writers?
Oh, yeah, you don't have to be introverted to be a writer. Yeah, extroverts can be writers too. There's kind of a combination. Some people kind of have one foot in both worlds, but when you write, you're creating from the inside out, you know? It's your mind, you're playing around with ideas inside your mind. The other thing I could just offhand is to write with a partner. It's much more fun, and there's somebody to share the ups and downs with. And that's a more social form of writing.
Makes perfect sense. Well, thank you so much. It looks like we'll give another few seconds to make sure that we're not missing any questions, but it looks like we've come to our conclusion. Thank you so very much, David, for agreeing to do this. And remember, everyone, a recording of this will be available on YouTube, and we'll send out a link to all the people that registered and all the live participants as well. Please feel free to share it on social media so that everybody can learn. And one more time, David, your blog is Hollywood Therapy on PsychCentral.com?
Right, HollywoodTherapyPsychCentral.com. If you go to Psych Central, you can find it just by typing in Hollywood Therapy. Go to the blogs section, and I think the easiest way is just to Google Hollywood Therapy PsychCentral.com, and I'm sure you'll find it easily there.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And then finally, do you have a website, David? Go ahead and plug your website.
Okay, yeah, I have two websites. One is I treat a lot of writers, directors, actors, people in creative fields. In therapy. I even have a client who's an ice sculptor, whose ice sculptures appear in many movies, you know, big party scenes like The Great Gatsby and stuff. And, I have architects and all kinds of people. So my website for therapy is my name, David Silverman, LMFT.com. So it's my name plus LMFT stands for Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist. So David Silverman, LMFT.com. And I have another website called HollywoodScriptWriting.com, which can also be helpful for writers, career advice and things like that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you, David, for your wonderful presentation. And with that, we will see everybody next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.